The moon was a sliver of bone in the bruised twilight sky, offering no comfort, no light. Below, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth, stale ale, and the nervous sweat of the pack. I stood on the splintered planks of the auction block, the cold seeping through the soles of my bare feet, a brutal reminder of the mud and filth I was born from and would likely die in. They watched me, their eyes hungry, not with desire, but with a contemptuous pity that was far worse. My name, Faelith Norwin, was a curse whispered in the dark, the Omega who could not bear children, a wolf whose blood ran like ash, a broken thing to be discarded. Inside me, where a pup's life should quicken, a different fire burned, a secret silent hum of power they could never comprehend. The auctioneer's voice was about to fall like an axe, and with it, the last vestiges of my life would be sold for scraps. Gorm, the auctioneer, was a fleshy, wheezing wolf whose own scent was a cloying mix of sour wine and greed. He circled me, his meaty hand gesturing dismissively. "Look well, my brothers and sisters," he boomed, his voice echoing off the damp stone walls of the market's edge. "What we have here is an unfortunate hop, the Norwin girl. Faelith." He spat my name as if it tasted foul. "Strong back, I'll grant her that. Good for hauling wood or scrubbing floors. Quiet, too. Never speaks a word." A ripple of cruel laughter moved through the assembled crowd. My muteness was another mark against me, another sign of my worthlessness. They didn't know it was a choice. A vow of silence made the day I learned my body was a barren field. If I could not give the pack the gift of new life through my womb, I would not give them the satisfaction of my voice in their ears. I would be a ghost among them. "But let us be honest," Gorm continued, leaning in conspiratorially, his foul breath washing over me. "She is Barren, an Omega who cannot fulfill her purpose. Her bloodline ends here, in dust and disappointment." He prodded my shoulder with a thick finger. I flinched, but held my ground, my gaze fixed on a loose stone in the wall opposite me. I would not look at them. I would not give them my tears. "So what am I bid for this utility?" Gorm's voice dripped with scorn. "A strong back for your kitchens? A silent servant to tend your fires? Let's start the bidding at 10 silver pieces. A bargain for a lifetime of servitude." Silence. The only sound was the sighing of the wind through the pines that bordered the territory. 10 silver pieces was an insult. It was the price of a lame hunting dog. My shame felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. Inside me, the secret fire flickered, a tiny spark of defiance. "I am more than this," it seemed to whisper. "I am more than a barren womb and silent lips." "5," a gruff voice called out from the back. It was Torvin, the blacksmith's second, a brute with hands like hammers and eyes that held nothing but casual cruelty. He wanted a skivvy, someone to beat when his temper flared. "5," Gorm scoffed, though his eyes lit with the prospect of at least getting something. 5 pieces for a wolf of the pack? Is that all her life is worth? Surely someone can do better. 6, came another voice, a weaver with a shrewish wife who went through servants like firewood. I closed my eyes. Torvin or the weaver, a life of bruises, or a life of endless, thankless toil. My hands, shackled in front of me with cold iron, trembled. I clenched them into fists, my knuckles white. The cold of the iron was a familiar pain, a grounding sensation in the swirling vortex of my humiliation. This was my fate. This was the price of being useless. The bidding crawled upward, one miserable silver piece at a time. 7, 8. It stalled at 9, offered by a tanner who smelled of chemicals and death. No one wanted a flawed Omega. I was a blight, a reminder of failure. The elders of my own family were there, my uncle and his mate, their faces hard and unforgiving. They were the ones who had brought me here, eager to wash their hands of the shame I brought upon their name. They did not even have the decency to look me in the eye. 9 silver pieces going once, Gorm called out, his voice tinged with disappointment. He'd hoped for more. A sudden hush fell over the crowd. It was not a gradual quieting, but a sharp, instantaneous cessation of all noise. The whispers died, the shuffling of feet stopped, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A new scent cut through the air, clean and sharp like winter frost on iron, overpowering the stench of mud and bodies. It was the scent of pine needles crushed underfoot, of distant snow, and of something ancient and powerful. It was the scent of command. I felt his presence before I saw him, a pressure in the air, a weight that settled on everyone, demanding submission. The crowd parted, creating a wide path, and then he was there, stepping out of the deepening shadows. Halric Vaindar, the Alpha of Alphas. He was a myth made flash, the ruler of our confederation of packs, a wolf so powerful that his name was only ever spoken in hushed, reverent tones. He was not supposed to be here, in this grimy corner of the market, where the unwanted were sold. He was a creature of council chambers and war tents, of moonlit hunts and blood oaths. He was larger than any wolf I had ever seen, his shoulders a bulwark against the world. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and a jagged scar cut a pale line from his left eyebrow to his jaw, a relic of a legendary battle that had secured his rule. But it was his eyes that held the world captive. They were the color of a storm-tossed sea, gray and deep and turbulent, and they saw everything, and they were fixed on me. Gorm the auctioneer seemed to shrink, his bluster evaporating like mist. He swallowed hard, his jowls trembling. "Alpha Vaindar," he stammered, bowing his head low. "We are honored by your presence." Halric did not acknowledge him. He didn't look at the crowd, or my uncle, or the cowering bitters. His gaze remained locked on me, and it was a gaze unlike any I had ever endured. It was not filled with pity or contempt. It was not lustful. It was analytical, intense, as if he were peeling back the layers of my skin, my flesh, my bones, and staring directly at the secret fire I held coiled in my soul. For the first time in years, I felt a stirring, not of my own dormant wolf, but of the power that lay even deeper. It recognized him. It hummed in response to his presence, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through my blood. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the profound silence. Time stretched, thin and taut. He took another step forward, his heavy boots making no sound on the muddy ground. His focus was so absolute it was like a physical touch, a heavy hand resting on my soul. He saw the grime on my cheeks, the torn hem of my tunic, the shame I tried so desperately to hide, and yet his expression remained unreadable, carved from stone. Finally he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried with absolute authority a low rumble that vibrated in my very bones. 100 gold marks. The crowd gasped as one. My head snapped up, my eyes widening in disbelief. It was an impossible sum. It was the price of a prize stallion, of a treaty between packs, of a noble-born bride price. It was a fortune. For me, for the Barren mute Omega. Gorm's jaw hung open. He stared at the Alpha, then at me, then back again. Alpha? Did you say 100 gold? Halric's stormy eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign of his impatience. Was I unclear? No, Alpha, of course not, Gorm squeaked, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. 100 gold marks, bid by Alpha Vaindar. Do I hear? He trailed off, looking at the stunned faces of the other wolves. Who would dare bid against Halric Vaindar? And for what? This broken girl? The silence was his answer. Sold! Gorm slammed his hand down on the podium with a crack that made me jump. Sold to the Alpha, for 100 gold marks. My uncle's face was a mask of shock and avarice. He had expected scraps. He was getting a treasure. But a flicker of fear danced in his eyes as he looked at the Alpha, then at me. What did the great Halric Vaindar want with his useless niece? The transaction was completed in silence. A heavy purse was tossed to my uncle, who caught it with fumbling hands. The finality of it settled over me, a new kind of dread. I had been sold, not for servitude, but for a king's ransom. The reason was a terrifying, gaping void. Halric moved then, ascending the 2 short steps to the auction block. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He towered over me, a mountain of muscle and presence. The scent of pine and winter was overwhelming, clean and wild, and it made the secret thing inside me sing. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He did not speak. He simply reached out and took the auctioneer's key. With a quiet click, he unlocked the iron manacles on my wrists. The heavy cuffs fell away, clattering onto the wooden planks. My skin, raw and chafed, tingled at the sudden freedom, at the cool night air. His fingers brushed against my wrist as he drew the chain away. It was the briefest of touches, skin against skin, but a bolt of pure energy shot up my arm, a searing heat that made my breath catch in my throat. The power inside me flared, a brilliant, blinding flash behind my eyes. For a split second, I thought he must have felt it, must have seen it. His gaze dropped to the now bare skin of my wrist, then rose again to meet my eyes. The storm in their depths seemed to swirl, a tempest of thoughts I could not begin to decipher. He saw my fear, my confusion, the silent questions screaming from my soul. Why? He leaned in closer, his voice a low, possessive growl, meant for me and me alone. A sound that bypassed my ears and went straight to the core of my being. Mine. The word hung in the air between us, a brand of heat and possession. Mine. It was not a promise, but a statement of fact. As unyielding as the granite mountains that ringed our territory, the world, which had receded to a distant hum, rushed back in a cacophony of shocked whispers and fearful murmuring. My uncle's face, which had been a mask of greed, was now pale with a dawning terror. To be noticed by Halric Vaindar was one thing, to have him claim your disgraced kin was another entirely. It was an honor so great it bordered on a death sentence. Halric paid them no mind. He turned from me, his broad back a wall that shielded me from the prying eyes of the crowd. With a curt, silent gesture, he beckoned me to follow. My legs, numb and trembling, barely obeyed. I stumbled down the 2 steps of the auction block, my bare feet sinking into the cold mud. The chill was a shock, but it was nothing compared to the icy dread coiling in my stomach. We walked through the parted crowd, a silent wolf and his ghost. He was the eye of the storm, and I was the debris caught in his wake. No one dared meet his gaze. They stared at me instead, their expressions a mixture of awe, suspicion, and burning curiosity. Yesterday I was less than nothing. Tonight I was the Alpha's property, a riddle purchased for a king's ransom. Their hatred had not vanished. It had simply been sharpened with fear. Outside the market square, a beast of a horse stood waiting, black as a starless night, its breath pluming in the cold air. It was a war horse, built for power and endurance, much like its master. Halric moved to the horse's side and then turned, his stormy eyes pinning me in place. I froze, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I expected him to command me to walk, to follow behind like the servant I was supposed to be. Instead, he reached for me. His hands were large and calloused, settling on my waist with a firm, inescapable grip. A gasp caught in my throat, silent but sharp. The heat of his touch seared through the thin fabric of my tunic, a startling jolt against my cold skin. Before I could process the shock of it, he lifted me as if I weighed nothing at all, swinging me up and settling me sideways onto the saddle. The movement was so swift, so effortless, it left me breathless. He swung himself up behind me in one fluid motion, his body a formidable presence at my back. I was trapped, wedged between the horse's powerful neck and the unyielding wall of his chest. His heat enveloped me, a furnace against the cold night. The scent of pine and winter frost was overpowering, filling my senses, sinking into my skin. I could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart against my spine, a slow, deep rhythm that seemed to mock the frantic fluttering of my own. He gathered the reins, his arm brushing against mine. The contact sent another shiver of that strange electric energy through me. The secret fire inside me, which had been a low hum, now pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a warm, liquid glow spreading through my veins. It was terrifying. It felt like recognition, like coming home to a place I'd never known. The horse moved, its gait smooth and powerful, carrying us out of the village and into the deep woods. The shadows of the ancient pines swallowed us whole. The sounds of the market faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind, the rhythmic fall of hooves on the damp earth, and the sound of my own ragged breathing. The silence between us was a living thing, heavy and fraught with unspoken questions. He did not speak, did not offer any explanation. He simply rode, his focus on the path ahead, his body a constant, unnerving pressure against mine. My mind raced, a frantic torrent of fear and confusion. Why? Why me? A Barren Omega was a liability, a drain on a pack's resources. To pay such a price was madness. Did he know? Could he somehow sense the power sealed within my blood? The thought was so terrifying I shoved it down, burying it deep. No one knew. It was a secret my mother had died to protect, a secret I had guarded with my silence. I risked a glance at his face, illuminated by the sliver of moon breaking through the canopy. The scar on his cheek was a pale, jagged line in the darkness, a testament to the violence he was capable of. His jaw was set, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on the path, narrowed in concentration. Yet I felt his awareness of me. It was in the steadying hand that rested on the saddle just behind my hip, in the way he shifted his weight to shield me from a low-hanging branch. He was a creature of contradictions, brutal power and precise control, wildness and an almost unnerving stillness. The journey felt endless. As we rode deeper into his territory, the very air began to change. The woods grew older, the trees larger, their branches like skeletal arms reaching for the sky. The power here was raw, ancient, palpable. It seeped from the earth, and I could feel my own hidden power responding to it, stretching and unfurling like a waking creature. Finally, through the trees, I saw it. A fortress of dark stone rising from the crest of a hill, stark and foreboding against the night sky. No graceful spires or welcoming lights, just sheer formidable walls and narrow watchful windows. It was his keep, Vaindar's heart, a place built for war and survival, not for comfort. As we passed through the massive iron gates, the guards on the walls dipped their heads in silent deference. Their eyes, however, followed me, sharp and questioning. The courtyard was lit by flickering torches that cast long dancing shadows. A stable hand rushed forward to take the horse. His head bowed so low I could not see his face. Halric dismounted with a quiet thud of his boots on the cobblestones. For a moment, he left me on the horse, and a fresh wave of humiliation washed over me. I was a parcel to be dealt with. But then he turned and reached for me again. His hands closed around my waist, and he lowered me to the ground. My legs were weak, and I stumbled, my hand flying out to brace myself against his chest. The muscle there was like solid rock beneath my palm. I snatched my hand back as if burned, my cheeks flushing with heat. His eyes met mine, and for a fleeting second, I saw something flicker in their stormy depths. A flash of something that was not coldness or command, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving me more confused than before. "This way," he rumbled, his first word since the market. His voice was a low vibration that seemed to settle deep in my bones. He led me into the great hall. It was a cavernous space, the ceiling lost in shadows far above. A massive fire roared in a stone hearth large enough to roast an ox, casting a warm, flickering light on ancient tapestries depicting epic hunts and brutal battles. A long, heavy wooden table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Seated in those chairs were 4 wolves, 2 men and 2 women, who I instantly knew to be his inner circle, his council. They rose as one when he entered, their faces a mixture of respect for him and undisguised shock as their eyes fell on me. One of them, a man with a sharp, wolfish face and cold, intelligent eyes, stepped forward. His scent marked him as the beta, second only to the alpha. "Halric," he said, his voice taut with concern. He bowed his head slightly. "The patrols have returned. The Blood Moon hunters are moving closer to the southern ridge." His gaze flickered to me, and his lips thinned in disapproval. "We did not expect you to bring a guest." "She is not a guest, Kael," Halric stated, his voice flat and final. He walked toward the fire, leaving me standing alone in the center of the vast room, feeling small and exposed under their hostile stares. An older woman, her hair a braid of silver, and her face a roadmap of hard-won battles, stepped forward. Her eyes were chips of flint. "It is the Barren Norwin girl," she said, her tone laced with contempt. "The one sold at the market. What purpose could she possibly serve here, Alpha? Our pack needs strength, not another mouth to feed that offers nothing in return." The insult was a physical blow, and I flinched. The word Barren followed me like a curse, a brand I could never escape. Halric turned slowly, the firelight dancing across his scarred face, making him look like a pagan god of war. His stormy gaze swept over his council, and a palpable chill descended upon the room. "My purpose is my own, Alara," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "And I do not require you to understand it. You will treat her with the respect due to one who is under my personal protection. Is that clear?" The command was absolute. Alara and Kael both lowered their eyes, murmuring their assent, but the resentment simmered just beneath the surface. They saw me as a weakness, a foolish indulgence of their alpha, and their animosity was a suffocating cloak. "Leave us," Halric commanded, his gaze dismissing them all. They hesitated for a heartbeat, exchanging uneasy glances, before filing out of the great hall in silence. The heavy wooden doors boomed shut behind them, leaving me alone with the alpha and the crackling fire. The silence that descended was more terrifying than the council's open hostility. He stood by the hearth, one arm resting on the stone mantelpiece, watching me. The firelight carved him from shadow and flame. He did not speak, simply observed, his intense gaze stripping away my defenses layer by layer. I stood frozen, my hands clasped in front of me, my head bowed. I waited for the command, for the explanation, for the reason I had been brought to this place of power and danger. He moved, circling me slowly, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. He was a predator assessing his new acquisition. I could feel his eyes on my back, on the worn fabric of my tunic, on the line of my neck. I trembled, a leaf in the wind. He came to a stop directly in front of me, so close that I had to tilt my head back to see his face. The firelight cast his features in sharp relief, the hard lines and the ancient pain in his eyes. He smelled of the night, of power, of pine and cold, clean air. It was a scent that both terrified and soothed the wild thing inside me. I braced myself for his questions, for his demands. I expected him to ask why a barren girl was worth his notice. I expected him to dismiss me to the kitchens, my exorbitant price a mere whim he had now grown tired of. But his eyes were not on my face. They were locked on the pulse that beat frantically at the base of my throat. He lifted a hand, and I flinched back, a lifetime of abuse making me expect a blow. His hand stopped, hovering in the air between us. His expression tightened, a flicker of some unreadable emotion crossing his face. Then slowly, deliberately, he lowered his hand and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my cheek. His touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt of lightning through my entire body. The power within me surged, a wave of heat that made my vision swim. He drew his hand back, his stormy eyes narrowing as he watched the aftermath of his touch play out on my face. He had felt it. I knew he had. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the very floorboards. He leaned in, his gaze pinning me, leaving me no room to run, no place to hide. "They sold you for being barren. They mocked you for being broken, he whispered, the sound a silken thread. But what they call a curse, I call a lie. Tell me, Faelith Norwin, what is the secret you are hiding in your blood? His question was a key turning in a lock I had kept rusted shut for a decade. My blood went cold, then hot, a dizzying, nauseating rush. The secret, the sleeping fire within me, recoiled like a serpent that had been prodded with a stick. It flared in panic, a silent, desperate scream that echoed only in the chambers of my own soul. I could feel it, a prickling heat under my skin, a dangerous hum that threatened to become a roar. If he saw, if he truly knew, I was undone. My first instinct, born of a lifetime of fear, was to deny. I shook my head, a frantic, jerky motion. My eyes, wide with terror, pleaded with him. No, you're wrong. I am nothing. My silence, once my shield, was now a useless, gaping void. I could not speak the lies my mind was screaming. I took a stumbling step backward, trying to put space between his knowing gaze and my fragile secret. But my heel hit the edge of a bearskin rug, and I faltered. He caught me before I could fall. His hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around my upper arm. His grip was not cruel, but it was absolute, a band of iron that held me steady. The contact was an inferno. Where his skin touched mine, the power surged, a wild, untamed current arcing between us. The torches in the hall flickered violently, casting our shadows into a frantic dance on the stone walls. His stormy eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second. The confirmation he sought was there, in the stuttering light, in the electric current that hummed in the air between us. He had his answer. He had felt it, a muscle feathered in his jaw. He didn't look angry. He looked grimly satisfied, like a hunter who had finally cornered his mythic prey. He released my arm as abruptly as he had seized it, and the world seemed to steady itself. The torches returned to their normal, rhythmic flicker. I stood trembling, my arm tingling where he had touched me, the phantom heat of his grip burning into my skin. The secret inside me was awake now, agitated and aware, a low, thrumming terror that I struggled to contain. He turned away from me without another word, his back a rigid wall of silence. For a long moment he stared into the fire, his profile carved in shadow and flame. I did not dare to breathe. The air was thick with his power, with my fear, and with the monumental, unspoken thing that now lay between us. "You will be given chambers," he said at last, his voice a low growl that seemed to be directed at the flames themselves. "You will eat. You will rest. You will not leave them without my permission." He turned his head, his gaze pinning me from across the room. "This is not a prison, Faelith Norwin. It is a sanctuary. Whether you see it as a cage is up to you." He strode to a heavy iron-bound door I hadn't noticed before, tucked away in the shadows to the side of the hearth. He pulled it open, revealing a spiral stone staircase descending into darkness. He inclined his head, a silent command for me to precede him. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this place and the wolf who saw too much. But where would I go? Back to the market? To my uncle who had sold me without a second thought? There was no escape. I was his. My feet felt like lead as I moved toward the door, my body a puppet pulled by the strings of his will. I passed him in the doorway, careful not to brush against him, the memory of that electric touch still singing in my veins. The air in the stairwell was cold and smelled of damp stone and something ancient, like deep earth. Torches were set in sconces along the curving wall, lighting the way down. The keep was a labyrinth. We walked through stone corridors, our footsteps the only sound. Guards we passed straightened instantly, their eyes on their alpha, their gazes sliding over me with a mixture of suspicion and awe. They saw a waif, a grimy, silent girl in a torn tunic. They could not see what their alpha saw. They could not feel the power thrumming just beneath my skin, a secret song of life in a place that felt dedicated to death. He finally stopped before a simple dark wooden door, identical to a dozen others we had passed. He pushed it open and stood aside, gesturing for me to enter. I hesitated on the threshold, my fear a tangible thing. This was it, the cage he had spoken of. With a deep, shaky breath, I stepped inside. My breath caught. It was not a cell. It was a room, simple and stark, but it was the most luxurious place I had ever been in. A bed piled high with thick furs was built into an alcove in the stone wall. A small fire crackled in a modest hearth, chasing the chill from the air. On a small wooden table stood a pitcher of water and a single cup. Folded neatly on the end of the bed was a clean tunic of soft, dark gray wool. It was the sight of the water that broke me. Clean water, just for me. Not a bucket to be hauled from the well, but a pitcher, waiting. A lump formed in my throat, thick and painful. Such a simple kindness felt more overwhelming than any cruelty. I heard the door close behind me with a soft, heavy thud. I was alone. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the furs impossibly soft beneath me. I ran my trembling hands over the wool of the clean tunic. It was coarse compared to what a high-born she-wolf might wear, but to me, it felt like silk. I looked around the small chamber, at the solid stone walls, the sturdy door, the single, narrow window, high up near the ceiling, barred with iron. A sanctuary, he had called it. It felt like a tomb for the girl I used to be. A short time later, a soft knock came at the door. I scrambled to my feet, my heart leaping into my throat. The door opened and an older she-wolf entered, carrying a wooden tray. She was wiry and weathered, her graying hair pulled back in a tight, practical braid. Her eyes were cautious, but they lacked the sharp contempt of Alara, the Alpha's councilwoman. She set the tray on the small table. It held a bowl of thick, savory stew, a chunk of dark bread, and a piece of cheese. The aroma filled the small room, and my stomach clenched with a hunger so sharp it was a physical pain. I hadn't eaten since the morning of the day before. The woman looked at me, her expression unreadable. "The Alpha commanded you be fed," she said, her voice raspy but not unkind. "My name is Lyra. I am to see to your needs." She paused, her eyes scanning my filthy state. "There is hot water for washing behind that screen." She pointed to a folded screen in the corner. "The clothes are clean." I simply stared at her, then at the food, unable to move. In my old life, I ate scraps, leftovers, whatever was tossed my way. I ate last, if at all. To be presented with a full meal, hot and fresh, was so foreign I didn't know how to react. Lyra's gaze softened with something that might have been pity. "Eat, child. No one will take it from you here." With that, she turned and left, closing the door quietly behind her. I approached the tray as if it were a wild animal. I broke off a tiny piece of bread and ate it, the taste exploding on my tongue, then another and another until the whole chunk was gone. I devoured the stew like a starving wolf, the hot, rich broth warming me from the inside out. I drank the entire pitcher of water, the cool liquid a balm to my parched throat. Only when the bowl and cup were empty did I lean back, my body trembling with the shock of a full stomach. Afterward, I washed. Behind the screen was a basin of steaming water and a rough bar of soap that smelled of lavender. I scrubbed away the grime of the market, the filth of my old life, watching the water turn gray in the bowl. I washed my hair, my hands raw from the effort, until it hung clean and damp down my back. Then I pulled on the soft wool tunic. It was too big, but it was warm and clean and whole. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and dried herbs, not of despair. Clean, fed, and warm for the first time in as long as I could remember, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. I was the property of Halrik Vaindar, an alpha who knew I was not what I seemed. He hadn't bought a servant, he had bought a secret. My eyes fell on a small clay pot sitting on the deep stone windowsill. In it was a single withered flower, its head bowed, its petals brown and curling at the edges. It was a moon petal, a flower that bloomed only in the deepest part of the forest, and this one was nearly dead. Drawn by an instinct I couldn't explain, I walked to the window. I reached out a hesitant finger and gently touched one of the dying petals. I closed my eyes, letting the fear and confusion recede, and focused on the flicker of life still buried deep within the plant's stem. I didn't know how I did it. I never had. It was a part of me, as natural and as uncontrollable as breathing. I just reached, not with my hand, but with the power inside me. I felt a warmth spread from my core, down my arm, and into my fingertip. It was the feeling of sun on fertile earth, of a deep, life-giving spring. A soft, golden light, so faint it was almost invisible, seeped from my skin into the flower. The brown, brittle petal beneath my finger softened. A hint of its deep, velvety purple returned to its edges. The stem, which had been bent and weak, straightened almost imperceptibly. It was not fully healed, my control was too fractured for that. But a spark of life had been rekindled. I snatched my hand back, my heart hammering. This was the secret. This was the curse. My body was barren, unable to create a wolf's life, but my blood held a different kind of life, an ancient wild magic that could coax life from death. It was the magic of the earth, the sun, the deep roots of the world. It was a power the shifters had lost millennia ago, a power they now feared and called unnatural. If they knew, they would not see a gift. They would see a blight, an abomination. They would tear me apart. A sound at the door made me spin around, my blood turning to ice. Halric stood in the open doorway, his massive frame filling the space. He had not knocked. He was simply there, a silent shadow. His stormy eyes were not on my face. They were fixed on the clay pot on the windowsill, on the single moon petal that now showed a fragile, impossible hint of purple life. He knew. He had seen. He stepped into the room, his presence shrinking the space to nothing. The scent of pine and winter filled the air, cold and sharp. He walked to the window, his gaze never leaving the flower. He reached out a large, calloused hand and gently, almost reverently, touched the petal I had just healed. He did not look at me, but I felt his gaze like a physical weight. The room was silent save for the crackling of the fire and the frantic beating of my own heart. He finally turned his head, his eyes locking with mine. The storm in their depths was churning with something I couldn't name. Not anger, but a profound, ancient hunger. He took a step toward me, then another until he was standing directly in front of me, caging me between his body and the cold stone wall. He lifted his hand and gently touched the side of my neck, his thumb coming to rest directly over the frantic pulse there. His touch was not a jolt this time, but a slow spreading heat, a deliberate claiming. "They say your blood is ash, little wolf," he murmured, his voice a low hypnotic rumble that vibrated through my entire being. "But I can feel the sun burning inside you." His words were a lit fuse, burning a path straight to the core of my terror. The sun, he saw the sun in my blood, the very thing my mother had called it in whispered, fearful stories before she died. "They won't understand the sun in you, Phalith," she had warned, her voice thin as winter reeds. "They worship the moon, they will fear the light." And now this Alpha, this creature of shadow and iron, saw it, named it, and held my life in the palm of his hand. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin of my neck, a slow, possessive rhythm that matched the deep thrum of my own power. Now singing in answer to his proximity, my breath hitched. I was trapped, pinned by his sheer presence and the terrifying truth in his eyes. He didn't just suspect, he knew. He was not guessing at a secret. He was confirming a truth he had somehow already uncovered. How? The word was a silent scream in my mind, a question I could not voice, but that he seemed to hear all the same. His stormy eyes held mine, a tempest of ancient knowledge and grim purpose. "There are stories," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration that traveled from his hand, through my skin and into my bones. Old stories, dismissed as legends, tales of wolves whose blood ran not with the spirit of the moon, but with the life force of the earth. Wolves who could mend what was broken, who could coax life from stone, but who could not bear pups of their own. Their power was in the land, not the womb. He leaned closer, his scent, pine, snow, and something uniquely him, something like power itself, enveloping me. They called them the sun-blooded, and they hunted them to extinction, fearing a power they could not control. Sun-blooded, the name echoed in the hollows of my memory, a ghost of a word from my mother's tales. It was my name, my curse, my truth. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and sharp. To be known, truly known, after a lifetime of hiding, was not a relief. It was the most profound terror I had ever experienced. I shook my head, a small, desperate gesture of denial. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be a legend, a target. I just wanted to be invisible. A flicker of something that might have been empathy crossed his hard features. "Fear is a wise companion, little wolf," he murmured, his thumb still tracing lazy, hypnotic circles on my neck. "But it will not keep you alive now." He finally drew his hand away, and the loss of his heat was a sudden, shocking cold. "My enemies are gathering. The blood moon hunters, zealots who believe our kind is an abomination, grow bolder. The land itself is growing sick. Crops fail, the herds thin, and the winters grow longer. My pack starves while the land dies around us. They see it as a curse from the moon for my supposed heresies." He paced the small room, a caged predator, his energy too vast for the confined space. "They are fools. They pray to the moon for strength, but they forget that the moon only reflects the light of the sun. Our power, our very life, comes from the world beneath our feet, a world you can hear whispering." He stopped and turned to face me, his eyes burning with an intensity that seared my soul. "I did not buy a servant, Phaleth Norwin. I bought a weapon, a hope. I bought the last glimmer of the sun." The weight of his words was crushing. He didn't want me. He wanted the power in my blood. I was not a person to him, but a tool, a means to an end. The realization was a shard of ice in my heart, sharp and painful. It should not have hurt. I was used to being seen as an object, a utility, but somehow, coming from him, it was a deeper wound. "Tomorrow is the full moon," he stated, his tone shifting, becoming hard and commanding once more. "The pack will gather at the moonstone for the rite of judgment, a test of strength and loyalty. My council has demanded you be presented. They see you as a weakness, a bad omen. They whisper that my purchase of a Barren Omega proves the rumors of the moon's disfavor are true. They demand I cast you out, or offer you to the moon for its judgment." Dread, cold, and absolute washed over me. The rite of judgment. It was a brutal, ancient ritual. Those accused of treason or who were deemed a weakness to the pack were forced to stand before the moonstone, a massive monolith of quartz that pulsed with the pack's collective energy. There, the alpha would pass sentence. It was often a death sentence. "You will come with me," he continued, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You will stand before the stone, before the entire pack, and you will show them why I paid a king's ransom for you." No, I thought, the word a frantic beat of wings in my chest. He couldn't. He would expose me. He would paint a target on my back for every zealot, every rival, every wolf who feared what they did not understand. He was asking me to trade one form of execution for another. He saw the mutiny, the raw terror in my eyes. He closed the distance between us in a single silent stride. He didn't touch me this time, but his proximity was a physical force, bending the air around us. "You think your silence can protect you?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You think hiding in the shadows has kept you safe? Look where it got you, Phaleth. On an auction block, sold for scraps. Your only value in your ability to scrub floors. Your own family threw you away." Each word was a brutal truth, stripping away my last defense. "Your fear is a cage of your own making. I am offering you the key. Use the power they scorn or be destroyed by it. The choice is yours, but you will be at that stone tomorrow night." With that, he turned and was gone, the door closing with a heavy, final thud. The echoes of his ultimatum remained, filling the silence of the room, whispering of suns and blood and judgment. The next day passed in a blur of numb terror. Lyra came with food, her face impassive, but I saw the pity in her eyes. The entire keep was humming with a tense, expectant energy. I could hear it in the shouts of the guards in the courtyard, feel it in the vibrations of the stone floor. They were all preparing for the rite, preparing for my judgment. I spent the hours huddled on the bed, my arms wrapped around my knees. The secret inside me, a cold, heavy knot in my belly. "Use it," he had said. How? It was not a weapon. It was a wild, intuitive thing, a gentle warmth that responded to dying things. It healed a flower. It could not face down a pack of wolves baying for blood. To them, my gift would look like dark magic, a witch's trick. Halric was a fool if he thought they would see a savior. They would see a heretic. As twilight bled across the sky, Lyra returned. This time she carried not a tray of food, but a simple sleeveless dress of pure white linen, the color of sacrifice. "The Alpha commands you to wear this," she said softly, laying it on the bed. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something else in their depths, a warning. "Be careful, child. The moon can be a cruel judge." I dressed in a trance, the clean, cool fabric a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. The dress was plain, unadorned, leaving my arms and neck bare. I was to be presented as I was, without rank or protection, an offering. When Halric came for me, the moon was already high in the sky, a perfect, luminous circle of silver that bathed the world in an ethereal glow. He, too, had changed. He wore no armor, only simple black leather pants and boots. His chest was bare, revealing a landscape of muscle and old scars that gleamed in the moonlight. He looked primal, a wolf in his purest form, the alpha ready to meet his pack. He did not speak, simply held out his hand. After a moment of hesitation, my fingers trembling, I placed my hand in his. His grasp was warm and strong, engulfing my own. The now familiar current arced between us, but this time it was different. It was not a startling shock, but a steady, grounding flow. He was lending me his strength, a silent acknowledgement of the terror he was forcing me to face. He led me from the keep, not through the guarded halls, but out a small private exit that opened onto a narrow path winding up the mountainside. The entire pack was already gathered in a vast, natural amphitheater at the base of a towering cliff. In the center of the clearing stood the moonstone. It was larger than I could have imagined, a jagged shard of the mountain itself, shot through with veins of quartz that seemed to drink the moonlight, glowing with a soft internal luminescence. The air was electric, thrumming with the combined power and anticipation of hundreds of wolves. As we emerged from the trees, a hush fell over the assembly. Every head turned, every pair of eyes, many already glowing with the imminence of the shift, fixed upon us, upon me. They saw their scarred, formidable alpha, holding the hand of the barren, worthless Omega girl he had bought. I could feel their scorn, their confusion, their anger, rolling toward me in waves. My legs threatened to give way, but Halric's grip tightened, an unyielding anchor in a sea of hostility. His council, Kael and Alara among them, stood near the base of the stone. Alara's face was a mask of cold triumph. This was what she wanted. My humiliation, my execution. She believed Halric's strange obsession with me would be his undoing, and she was eager to see it happen. Halric led me to the center of the clearing, stopping a few feet from the glowing monolith. He released my hand and took a step back, leaving me alone to face the pack. I felt utterly exposed, a lamb surrounded by wolves, the white of my dress a beacon in the moonlight. Alara stepped forward, her voice ringing out with cold, clear authority. "Alpha Halric Vaindar, you stand before the pack, before the sacred moonstone, to answer for the weakness you have brought into our midst. You have brought this barren thing into our home, a blight upon our people when we are already suffering. The moon demands a pure bloodline. It demands strength. This girl is an insult to our traditions, a mockery of our suffering. We demand judgment. Let the moon decide her fate." A roar of agreement rose from the pack, a primal, bloodthirsty sound that vibrated in my chest. Judgment! Judgment! Halric stood silent, letting their fury wash over him. Then he raised a hand, and the roaring subsided into a tense, expectant silence. His stormy eyes swept over the crowd, commanding and absolute. "You speak of weakness, Elara," he began, his voice a low thunder that carried to the furthest edges of the clearing. "You see a barren girl and call her a blight. You look at what you do not understand, and you fear it. Your fear makes you blind." He turned his gaze to me, and it was a physical blow. "Faelith Norwin is not a weakness. She is our salvation." A wave of scornful laughter and angry muttering rippled through the pack. Elara sneered openly. "Salvation? She cannot even give the pack a single pup. What salvation can she offer? Magic tricks? Witchcraft?" "Silence!" Halric's roar silenced them all instantly. He walked to the base of the moonstone, where a small withered sapling grew from a crack in the rock. Its leaves brown and curled, its branches brittle. It was a sign of the sickness in the land, a symbol of their despair. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a silent, desperate command. "Show them, now." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. My legs were frozen, my blood like ice. I couldn't do it. The fear was too great. I looked at the hostile faces, the glowing eyes, the bared teeth. I saw Elara's contempt, Kail's suspicion, the pack's hunger for a scapegoat. Then I looked at Halric. I saw the weight of his pack on his shoulders, the desperation behind his iron control. He wasn't just gambling with my life. He was gambling with everything. Taking a shuddering breath, I walked on trembling legs to the withered sapling. I knelt in the dirt, the rough ground cold beneath my knees. I reached out a hand, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely control them. I laid my palm against the sapling's dry, brittle trunk. I closed my eyes and did the only thing I knew how to do. I reached. I pushed past the fear, past the roaring of the crowd, past everything, and sank my consciousness deep, deep into the earth. I sought the flicker of life buried in the sapling's roots. I found it, a tiny, fading ember. And then I called the sun. I gathered the power within me, the warmth, the light. I pulled it from my blood, from my very soul, and poured it into the dying tree. A soft, golden light began to glow from my hand, spilling onto the trunk, seeping into the wood. The pack gasped. The light grew brighter, warmer, illuminating my face, my white dress, the astonishment on the faces of those nearest me. Under my touch, the sapling began to tremble. The dry, brittle bark softened. A tinge of green appeared, then deepened. The curled, dead leaves unfurled, turning a vibrant, healthy green. A new bud appeared on a twig, then another and another. They swelled, and then impossibly, they burst open, unfurling into delicate, perfect white blossoms that glowed with a soft, ethereal light of their own. The sapling, once dead, was now vibrantly, miraculously alive, its blossoms releasing a sweet, heady fragrance into the night air. I slumped back, my arm falling to my side, the effort leaving me dizzy and breathless. I opened my eyes. The clearing was utterly silent. The entire pack, hundreds of wolves, stared in stunned, disbelieving silence at the miracle I had wrought. Alara's jaw was slack, her eyes wide with shock and a dawning fear. I looked at Halric. He was staring at the blossoming tree, and then his gaze lifted to meet mine. The iron control of his features had cracked, and in his eyes I saw something that stole the air from my lungs. It was not the satisfaction of a commander whose weapon had proven effective. It was raw, unguarded awe. He strode toward me, his movements fluid and powerful. He didn't stop at the tree. He came directly to me, kneeling in the dirt before me. The pack watched, breathless. Their alpha was kneeling, to me. He reached out and cupped my face in his large, warm hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears I hadn't realized were falling. His stormy eyes searched mine, filled with a fierce, possessive fire. "Let the moon judge that," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken growl, meant only for me. And then, before the entire pack, before the glowing moonstone, He leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. His kiss was not gentle. It was a brand, a claim, a cataclysm. It tasted of winter storms and ancient earth, of absolute power and a desperate, raw hunger that mirrored the one awakening in me. For a single suspended heartbeat, the world ceased to exist. There was no pack, no glowing stone, no judgment. There was only the firm, demanding pressure of his mouth on mine, the heat of his hands cradling my face, and the explosive surge of power that detonated between us. It was not the electric jolt of his touch, nor the warm, healing hum of my own gift. This was something else entirely, a violent fusion of two opposing forces. His was the moon, cool, primal, dominant. Mine was the sun, warm, life-giving, wild. When they met, they did not cancel each other out. They ignited. A blinding white light erupted behind my closed eyes, and I felt the power, my power, his power, our power, rush through me in a torrential, uncontrollable wave. The moonstone answered. The monolith, which had been glowing with a soft, steady silver light, suddenly flared with an incandescent brilliance that forced the entire pack to shield their eyes. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the ground, a sound that felt older than the mountains themselves. The newly blossomed sapling at my side pulsed with a golden light of its own, its fragrance intensifying, flooding the clearing with the scent of impossible life. Halric tore his mouth from mine with a guttural growl, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His eyes, when they met mine, were no longer stormy gray, but molten silver, the irises blown wide, his wolf shimmering just beneath the surface, wild and possessive. He was looking at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, not as a weapon or a hope, but as his other half, his mate. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. This was what the elders spoke of in hushed tones, the fated bond, the mate call that a wolf's soul sings for its twin. But it wasn't supposed to be like this. I was barren, broken, an omega without a wolf to call her own, and he was the alpha of alphas. Such a bond was not just impossible, it was sacrilege. The pack, recovering from the blinding light, stared at us, their expressions shifting from shock to a dawning, terrified reverence. They had just witnessed something that defied all their laws, all their beliefs. They saw their alpha kneeling before the barren omega, and they saw the sacred moonstone itself bow to the power unleashed between them. Elara's face was ashen, her earlier triumph replaced by a horrified disbelief. Kyle, his beta, watched us with a new, calculating intensity, his mind clearly racing to comprehend the shift in power he had just witnessed. He was not a zealot like Elara. He was a strategist, and he had just seen a new piece placed on the board, one that changed the entire game. Halric rose to his feet in one fluid movement, pulling me up with him. He kept his arm wrapped firmly around my waist, holding me against his side, a clear, defiant statement to his pack. He turned to face them, his silver eyes blazing with a power that was now magnified, amplified by the connection that sizzled between us. "You asked for the moon's judgment," he roared, his voice imbued with the thrumming energy of the stone. "And you have received it. The land is dying because our bond with it has been severed. We have forgotten the balance. We have worshipped the reflection and scorned the source." He gestured to me, his grip on my waist possessive. "Faelith Norwin is not a curse. She is the cure. She is sun-blooded, and she is my mate." The final two words dropped into the stunned silence like stones into a deep well. Mate, the sacred, unbreakable bond. To declare a barren omega his mate was an act of rebellion so profound it bordered on madness. It shattered centuries of tradition, of valuing bloodlines and heirs above all else. A low growl started at the back of the crowd. It was Torvin, the blacksmith's second, who had bid on me at the market. His face was contorted with rage and disbelief. "A mate? That thing? She has no wolf. She cannot bear you an heir. This is a mockery. You defile our traditions, Alpha." He lunged forward, his body beginning to contort, the sickening crack of bones signaling his shift. He was challenging his alpha. It was suicide. Halric didn't even flinch. Before Torvin could complete his transformation, Halric moved. He was a blur of shadow and speed. One moment he was by my side. The next he was in front of Torvin, his hand clamped around the half-shifting wolf's throat, lifting him clear off the ground. Torvin's desperate, choked growls died in his throat, his legs kicking uselessly. "I am your alpha," Halric snarled, his voice a low, lethal vibration. His silver eyes bored into Torvin's. "My mate is my mate. My choice is law. The moon has blessed this union. If any other among you wishes to question my judgment, step forward now." He held the struggling wolf aloft, a clear demonstration of his brutal, untempered power. No one moved. No one breathed. The challenge had been answered with absolute, terrifying finality. He held Torvin for a moment longer, then tossed him aside like a piece of refuse. The wolf landed in a crumpled heap, gasping and whimpering, the fight utterly broken out of him. Halric turned his back on the shamed challenger and strode back to me. He took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine, and the steady current of his strength flowed into me once more, chasing away the tremors of fear. He looked at me, and the raw power in his gaze softened into something fiercely protective. "The right of judgment is over," he announced to the silent pack. "Return to your homes. Contemplate what you have seen tonight. A new age begins for this pack, an age of balance." He turned and led me away from the moonstone, back toward the path to the keep. The pack parted for us, their heads bowed not just in submission, but in a new, fearful awe. They didn't look at him, they looked at me. I was no longer the Barren Omega. I was a miracle, an omen, the Alpha's impossible mate. Their fear had not vanished, but now it was mingled with a terrified respect. I was the sun, and they were creatures of the moon, accustomed to the shadows. I had a feeling they would never be comfortable in my light. We walked back to the keep in silence, his hand a warm, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. Mate. The word echoed in my head, both a promise and a threat. The bond hummed between us, a living, breathing entity. It was more than the spark of power I'd felt before. Now it was a deep, resonant chord connecting my soul to his. I could feel the edges of his emotions, his fierce possessiveness, his grim satisfaction, and underneath it all, a current of profound, bone-deep loneliness that startled me with its intensity. For the first time, I saw past the alpha, past the myth, and glimpsed the man, the wolf, burdened and isolated by his own strength. When we reached my chamber, he didn't leave me at the door. He followed me inside, closing the heavy door behind him, shutting out the rest of the world. The small room felt charged, the air thick with unspoken words and the overwhelming presence of the newly forged bond between us. The simple fire in the hearth seemed to burn brighter, warmer. He finally released my hand and walked to the small window, staring out at the moonlit landscape. His broad shoulders were tense, the muscles in his back corded with strain. My father and his father before him, they presided over the slow decay of our people, he said, his back still to me. They held to the old ways, the traditions that said power came only from the moon, from the strength of the bloodline. They watched the land sicken, the herds vanish, and called it a test of faith. He turned to face me, his eyes once more the color of a stormy sea, the silver fire banked but still present in their depths. I knew it was a lie. I searched the oldest lore, the scrolls my father had forbidden, and I found the whispers of you, the sun-blooded. He took a step toward me. I didn't know if you were real. A myth, a desperate hope. I sent scouts to every pack, every settlement, searching for whispers of a Barren Omega, who was more. They found tales of a silent girl in the Norwin clan, a girl whose presence seemed to soothe agitated livestock, whose discarded scraps of food never rotted. Small things, insignificant to most. But to me, he trailed off, taking another step. When I saw you on that block, I knew, he continued, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl. I felt it, a flicker of warmth in the cold. I had to have you. I had to know. He was in front of me now, his heat a palpable presence. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently traced the line of my jaw. I did not plan for this, he admitted, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't decipher. The bond, I thought, to use your gift, to use you to save my people. I did not expect my own soul to recognize yours. The honesty in his voice was disarming. He was admitting he had intended to use me as a tool, yet his confession felt more like a surrender than a threat. The bond between us hummed with the truth of his words. I have painted a target on your back tonight, Phalith, he said grimly. Ilara and her faction will not accept this. They see you as a perversion and my claiming of you as heresy. The Blood Moon Hunters. If they learn of you, they will stop at nothing to destroy you. They believe your kind is a blight on the natural order. He cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. But I will not let them touch you. You are mine, not my weapon, not my hope, mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have terrified me. Instead, a strange, fierce warmth bloomed in my chest. For the first time in my life, I was not being claimed as property to be used and discarded. I was being claimed as something precious, something to be protected. The power inside me, which had been agitated and fearful for so long, settled into a calm, steady glow, basking in his proximity. It trusted him. And against all reason, I realized that I was beginning to as well. My silence had been my shield for so long, a wall I'd built brick by brick. But looking into his eyes, feeling the undeniable truth of the bond that connected us, the wall began to crumble. I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath, gathering a courage I didn't know I possessed. I opened my mouth, my throat tight and rusty from years of disuse. I focused on his eyes, on the wolf who saw the sun inside me, and for the first time in 10 years, I spoke. My voice was a broken, fragile thing, a mere whisper of sound. Halric. My name on my lips, however fragile, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He froze, his hand still cupping my cheek, his stormy eyes widening in stunned disbelief. The name was more than a sound. It was an acceptance, a bridge across the chasm of silence I had inhabited for a decade. It was the first crack in the dam, and the truth of the bond between us rushed through it, a current of emotion so potent it left us both breathless. He searched my face, his gaze tracing my lips, as if to confirm they had truly moved, had truly formed his name. A muscle in his jaw worked, and the iron control he wore like armor seemed to slip, revealing a flicker of raw, unguarded vulnerability. He had commanded my presence, unveiled my secret, and claimed me before his entire pack. But this quiet, broken whisper was a surrender he hadn't expected. It was a gift I had given to him, and him alone. Phalith, he breathed, his own voice rough, thick with an emotion I couldn't name. He closed his eyes for a brief second, as if savoring the sound of my voice, of my acknowledgement. When he opened them again, the storm in their depths had calmed, replaced by a fierce, blazing protectiveness that was more intimidating than any rage. He leaned his forehead against mine, a gesture of profound intimacy that sent a tremor through me. We stood like that for a long moment, simply breathing the same air, two solitary souls bound by an impossible fate. The bond between us was a living thing, a warm, pulsing chord that sang with a harmony of sun and moon. I could feel his relief, his grim determination, and a deep, aching tenderness that was directed entirely at me. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. For the first time, I felt safe. "They will come for you," he murmured against my skin, his voice a low vibration that I felt more than heard. "Ilara will not sit idle. She sees you as a blasphemy that will bring ruin. She will use tradition, fear, anything she can, to turn the pack against you." He drew back, though he kept his hands on my shoulders, his grip grounding. "We must be ready. Your power, it is a miracle, but it is also a beacon. We do not know the limits of what you can do. You healed the sapling. What else? Can you mend flesh? Can you sense the sickness in the land? His questions were not demands, but the thoughts of a strategist assessing his most vital asset. I looked down at my own hands, suddenly seeing them as foreign objects. I had only ever used my gift in secret, on wilting flowers and once, a bird with a broken wing. It was a small, intuitive magic, born of instinct, not control. The thought of wielding it as a weapon, or a tool on a grand scale, was overwhelming. I shook my head, my throat still tight. I don't know, I whispered, the words scraping, unfamiliar. It just happens. Then we will learn, he stated, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. Together. The next few days were a blur. Halric kept me close, a constant, formidable shadow at my side. I was moved from the small, isolated chamber to his own sprawling quarters, a suite of rooms high in the main tower, with a massive stone hearth and a balcony that overlooked the entire territory. It was a clear, public declaration of my new status. I was no longer a prisoner or a guest. I was his Luna, though the title was never spoken. The hostility from the pack was a palpable thing. They bowed their heads when we passed, but their eyes were filled with fear and suspicion. They avoided me, scuttling out of my path, as if my very presence might infect them. I was a saint to some, a demon to others, and a terrifying omen to all. Alara and her faction were a constant, simmering threat. They watched me from the shadows, their faces masks of cold piety, their whispers spreading like poison through the keep. They spoke of the old gods, of the wrath of a scorned moon, of a sun-blooded witch who had entranced their alpha. Halric ignored them, his focus entirely on me and the coming conflict. He took me to the ancient library, a dusty, forgotten chamber filled with crumbling scrolls and leather-bound tomes. Here, we pored over the lore he had discovered, searching for any mention of the sun-blooded. We found fragmented references, fearful accounts of wolves who could make the deserts bloom, but whose touch could also scorch the earth if their power was left untamed. There were dark warnings of an entity known only as the Blight, a creeping corruption that fed on imbalance and could only be fought by a union of sun and moon. It seemed my gift was as much a danger as it was a salvation. He began to test my abilities. He brought me a withered grove of apple trees behind the keep, their branches barren for years. With him standing guard, a silent, watchful presence, I laid my hands on the gnarled trunks. I closed my eyes and reached, not just with my own power, but with the strength he seemed to lend me through the bond. The sun within me answered, and I felt the life force flow from me into the dormant wood. It was exhausting, leaving me pale and trembling. But over the course of 3 days, the trees began to bud. The news spread through the keep like wildfire, further cementing my reputation as something unnatural. For every wolf who saw the budding trees as a sign of hope, there were 2 who saw it as a perversion of nature's laws. The true test came on the 4th night. We were in his chambers, a tense silence hanging between us as he sharpened the lethal-looking blade of his longsword by the fire. A frantic pounding on the door broke the quiet. Kael, his beta, burst in, his face grim. "Alpha, it's the Blood Moon Hunters. A patrol was ambushed on the southern ridge. 3 are dead, 2 are alive, but they're badly wounded. The healer says their wounds are poisoned. Dark magic. She can't stop the bleeding." Halric was on his feet in an instant, his sword abandoned. "Where are they?" "In the infirmary. Halric, they're dying." Kael's gaze flickered to me, a mixture of desperation and deep-seated skepticism in his eyes. He knew why Halric had brought me here. "Stay here," Halric commanded me, his voice a low growl. "Lock the door." He turned to leave, but I found my voice stronger this time. "No." He stopped, turning back to me, his eyes blazing. "Phalith, this is not a test with a dying tree. These are my men. This is not the time." "They are our men," I corrected him softly, stepping forward. I placed a hand on his arm, and the bond flared between us. "You said we would learn together. You said I could mend what was broken. Let me try. He stared at me, his jaw tight, a war raging in his eyes between his protective instincts and his duty as an alpha. He saw the determination on my face, the silent plea. Finally, with a grim nod, he acquiesced. Stay behind me. The infirmary was a scene from a nightmare. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood and the sharp herbal smell of futile poultices. 2 wolves lay on cots, their bodies slick with sweat, their breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The pack healer, an old she-wolf named Morwen, was weeping in a corner, her hands stained red. The men's wounds were horrifying, deep, jagged cuts that were not closing. Instead, they oozed a sickly black substance, and the flesh around them was turning gray and necrotic. The other wolves in the room shrank back as I entered, their eyes wide with fear and disgust. Keep the witch away from them, one of them snarled. Halrick's roar silenced them. She is your Luna. You will show her respect, or you will answer to me. He cleared a path to the nearest cot. Do what you can, he murmured to me, his voice a low rumble of desperation. I knelt beside the first wolf, a young man whose face was pale as death. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. I could feel his life force, his spirit flickering like a guttering candle flame. The poison from the blade was not just in his flesh, it was consuming his very essence. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. This was not a flower. This was a soul. Taking a shuddering breath, I placed my hands on either side of the festering wound on his chest. It was cold to the touch, a deathly, unnatural chill. I closed my eyes and reached for the sun. I bypassed the flesh, the blood, the poison, and sought the fading ember of his life. I found it, and gently I cupped it in my power, shielding it, warming it. I poured my energy into it, not with the flood I had used on the trees, but with a gentle, steady stream, like coaxing a fire back to life, one breath at a time. A golden light seeped from my hands, sinking into the wolf's chest. The black ooze from the wound hissed, steaming as if my light were acid to it. The necrotic gray flesh began to recede, a faint, healthy pinkness returning to the edges of the wound. The wolf's breathing deepened, steadied. Color began to return to his face. The room was utterly silent, the only sound the young wolf's strengthening breaths. I could feel the astonished eyes of everyone on me. Kael was staring, his mouth slightly agape. Morwen, the healer, had risen to her feet, her eyes wide with a reverence that bordered on worship. The effort was immense. Sweat beaded on my brow, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. Halrick's hand came to rest on my shoulder, and a surge of his strength flowed into me through the bond, steadying me, replenishing me. I opened my eyes and looked at him, and the pride and raw emotion in his gaze gave me the strength to continue. I moved to the second wolf and repeated the process. His wounds were more severe, the poison more advanced. It was a battle, a fierce tug of war between my light and the darkness consuming him. I pushed everything I had into him, feeling my own energy drain away, leaving me hollow and weak. But I felt the shift. I felt the poison recede, the life force steady and take hold. When I finally pulled my hands away, I was trembling, on the verge of collapse. Halrick caught me, sweeping me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing. The second wolf was breathing deeply, his skin no longer gray. The bleeding had stopped. They would live. As Halrick carried me from the infirmary, the wolves in the room, the same ones who had called me a witch moments before, dropped to one knee, their heads bowed low in a gesture of profound, unforced loyalty. They were no longer looking at an omen. They were looking at their Luna. Back in our chambers, Halrick laid me gently on the bed, pulling the thick furs up around me. He built up the fire until it roared, chasing the deep chill from my bones. He sat on the edge of the bed, taking my cold hand in his 2 warm ones, his face etched with worry and a fierce, burning pride. "You saved them," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have never seen such a thing." "The bond," I whispered, my voice weak. "I couldn't have done it without you." His thumb stroked the back of my hand. It is your power, Phalith. I am merely the anchor. His expression hardened. But Alara will not see this as a miracle. She will see it as a confirmation of her fears. Power like this will terrify her. She will act soon. I can feel it. He was right. The very next evening, as a cold, biting wind howled around the keep, a single mournful horn blast echoed from the watchtower. It was the signal for an alpha's death. Halric was on his feet in an instant, a feral growl ripping from his chest. We both knew what it meant. It was a lie, a signal, a coup. Heavy armored footsteps thundered in the corridor outside our door, followed by a splintering crash as the door was battered down. Kyle stood on the threshold, his face grim, his sword drawn. Behind him were a dozen of the Alpha's guard, loyal to him and him alone. Ilara has made her move, Kale said, his voice urgent. She has told the pack you are dead, killed by the Luna's dark magic. She has declared herself Alpha Regent and has sealed the gates. Her followers are marching on the Great Hall. They mean to hold the keep. Halric's face was a mask of cold, lethal fury. His eyes bled from gray to silver, his wolf pressing close to the surface. He looked at me, at the warriors at his door, and then at the howling wind outside. She has forgotten one thing, he snarled, his voice a promise of death. An Alpha's power is not in his keep. He turned to me, his silver eyes blazing, and in them I saw not fear, but the wild, exultant thrill of the coming battle. She has forgotten her Alpha is not the only one who bleeds iron. The keep had become a tomb, sealed and silent. Ilara's move was as swift as it was treacherous. By declaring Halric dead and me a sorceress, she had played on the pack's deepest fears, turning the keep from a fortress into our prison. But as Halric's chilling words echoed in the chamber, I realized she had made a fatal miscalculation. She had caged the storm, but she had forgotten it could break its own walls. They hold the gates in the armory, Kyle reported, his voice a low, urgent growl. Her core followers are fanatics, a dozen of our best warriors who believe she is saving the pack from your heresy. They are holding the Great Hall, daring anyone loyal to you to challenge them. Halric paced before the fire, not with agitation, but with the lethal, coiled energy of a predator about to be unleashed. She thinks to force a challenge on her own terms, in the heart of her power. She is a fool. His silver eyes met mine, and the raw, untamed power in them sent a shiver down my spine. This was not the commander, the strategist. This was the Alpha, the wolf, ready to kill to protect his own. We can't break the gates from inside, Kyle stated grimly, and a direct assault on the hall will be a bloodbath. We will not be breaking gates, Halric said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. He walked to the balcony, the howling wind whipping his dark hair. He placed his hands on the stone balustrade and looked down. It was a sheer drop of at least 100 feet to the rocky courtyard below. And we will not be assaulting the hall. We will be taking back what is mine. He turned back to us, a wild, almost terrifying grin on his face. She has forgotten about the old ways. He looked at me, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. Stay with Kyle. Barricade this room. They will come for you first. No, I said, the word coming out stronger, steadier than ever before. I walked to his side, my bare feet silent on the cold stone. I would not cower in a room while he fought for us. She declared me a witch. She used me to incite this. This is my fight, too. Halric's gaze searched mine, and the bond between us pulsed with a fierce, burning pride. He saw not a frightened Omega, but a partner, a Luna ready to stand by his side. Kyle watched the silent exchange, his eyes widening slightly as he witnessed the depth of our connection, the unspoken understanding that passed between us. So be it, Halric finally conceded with a curt nod. He turned to his beta. Kyle, get to the west wall. Use the Raven's call, the old signal. Gather those still loyal to me outside the gates. When the time is right, they will be my hammer, he said, his hand finding mine, his fingers lacing through my own, will be the anvil. Kyle bowed his head, a look of fierce loyalty on his face. It will be done, Alpha. He melted back into the shadows of the corridor, a ghost on a vital mission. Halric led me to the center of the room. He took my face in his hands, his gaze intense. I am going to shift, Phalith. It will be violent. Do not be afraid. I simply nodded, my heart pounding a steady, resolute rhythm. I trusted him, utterly. He closed his eyes, a low growl rumbled in his chest, and his entire body went rigid. The air around him seemed to thicken, to crackle with raw, primal energy. I felt the shift through our bond, a glorious, agonizing explosion of power. The sound of cracking, rearranging bone was sickening, but I did not look away. Muscles bunched and writhed under his skin, his human form melting away, reshaping into something older, truer. Dark fur, the color of a stormy night, sprouted across his body, his face elongated into a feral muzzle, his teeth lengthening into vicious, gleaming fangs. When it was over, the man was gone. In his place stood the beast. He was magnificent, a wolf of impossible size, larger than any I had ever seen, his shoulders as high as my chest. His fur was deep charcoal gray, tipped with silver that seemed to drink the firelight. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were no longer stormy gray, but pure, molten silver, glowing with an ancient intelligence and a ferocious, possessive light that was focused entirely on me. He took a step toward me, and I did not flinch. I reached out a trembling hand and laid it on his massive, furry head. The fur was thick and coarse, and a low, pleased rumble vibrated through his chest, a sound that I felt in my own bones through our bond. He leaned into my touch, nudging my hand with his great head, a gesture of profound trust and affection that belied his terrifying form. He was my Halric. Then he turned toward the balcony. He gathered his powerful haunches and, with an explosive leap, he launched himself over the balustrade and into the howling night. My heart leaped into my throat, but he did not fall. He landed with impossible agility on a narrow stone ledge far below, his claws finding purchase where none seemed to exist. He was one with the stone, with the storm. A creature of the wild reclaiming his territory. He scaled the sheer wall of the keep with a terrifying grace, moving down, 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 until he disappeared into the shadows of the courtyard below. My part to play was not one of violence, but of life. I walked to the massive hearth, the stones still radiating the heat of the fire. Alar's power came from fear and tradition. Halric's came from primal strength. Mine came from the earth itself. The keep was built of mountain stone. Its foundation sunk deep into the living rock. I placed my palms flat against the cold stone of the wall beside the hearth. I closed my eyes, shutting out the howling wind and the distant shouts of Alara's traders. I reached down, not for the sun this time, but for the heart of the mountain. I let my consciousness sink through the floor, through the foundations, into the deep, dark, sleeping rock and soil beneath the keep. At first, there was nothing but cold, silent stone, but I pushed deeper, following the threads of my own power, the sun-blooded gift that connected me to all living things. And then I felt it, a network, a web of ancient roots, gnarled and thick as a man's arm, that had burrowed through the rock over centuries, forming the true foundation of the fortress. They were dormant, sleeping, but they were alive. I called to them. I poured my warmth, my life, into that sleeping web. I did not ask for blossoms or leaves. I asked for strength. I asked for movement. I asked them to wake up. A deep, groaning tremor shook the entire tower. Dust rained down from the ceiling. A faint green light began to pulse in the stone beneath my hands, the light of my own power being drawn into the earth. The roots were waking. In the great hall, Alara stood before the Alpha's throne, her face flushed with victory. Her most loyal warriors stood around her, their weapons drawn, their faces grim and fanatical. "Halric is dead," she proclaimed, her voice ringing with false grief. "Slain by the witch's curse, But do not fear. I, Ilara of the Blood Moon lineage, will be your shield. I will be your Alpha Regent. I will purge this pack of the sun-blooded heresy and restore us to the moon's favor." A roar of approval went up from her followers, but it was cut short by a sound that made their blood run cold. A single powerful howl, echoing from the courtyard just outside the massive barred doors of the hall. It was a sound they all knew, the sound of their Alpha, and he was not dead. Panic flickered in Ilara's eyes. "It's a trick!" she shrieked. "The witch is creating illusions. Hold the doors!" The heavy oak doors of the great hall boomed as something of immense weight slammed into them from the outside. Once, twice. The thick iron hinges groaned in protest. The men barring the doors strained, their faces pale with fear. Then a new sound began, a groaning, scraping sound from the floor beneath their feet. The stone flags of the hall began to tremble. Cracks appeared, spider-webbing out from the walls. Before their horrified eyes, thick, gnarled roots, glowing with a faint, ethereal green light, burst through the stone floor. They were like powerful, living serpents, twisting and writhing, wrapping themselves around the legs of the throne, around the columns that supported the roof. The men at the door screamed as roots thick as pythons erupted from the walls beside them, smashing the massive wooden bar to splinters. The hinges tore from the stone with a scream of tortured metal, and the great doors burst inward. Standing in the doorway, framed by the storm, was the Alpha. His massive black wolf form was a vision from a nightmare, his silver eyes glowing with a murderous light. He was not alone. Behind him, dozens of other wolves, his loyalists summoned by Kael, were shifting, their growls a rising chorus of promised vengeance. Ilara's followers froze, trapped between the enraged Alpha at the door and the impossible living roots that now filled the hall. Their fanaticism evaporated, replaced by raw, primal terror. They had followed a lie, and now the truth had come to claim them. Halric paid them no mind. His glowing silver eyes were fixed on one target, Ilara. He launched himself into the hall, a blur of dark fur and gleaming teeth. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was breathtaking, a force of nature unleashed. Ilara's warriors, who moments before had been ready to die for her, scrambled out of his way, unwilling to face the Alpha's righteous fury. Ilara drew a hidden dagger, her face a mask of hate and terror. She was of the Blood Moon line, a warrior in her own right. She would not go down without a fight. As Halric leaped for her, she lunged, aiming the blade at his exposed throat. But the roots were faster. A thick, gnarled tendril shot up from the floor, wrapping itself around her wrist with crushing force. The dagger clattered to the stone. Another root wrapped around her other arm, and another around her legs, hoisting her into the air, holding her helpless and immobile. Halric landed silently before her, shifting back into his human form. In a swirl of primal energy, he stood before the suspended, struggling Ilara, his face hard as granite, his eyes cold as the grave. The rest of the pack, loyalists and traitors alike, watched in terrified silence. "You chose treason, Ilara." Halric's voice was dangerously quiet. "You chose fear over faith. You tried to tear this pack apart for your own ambition." "She is a witch!" Ilara screamed, her body twisting in the grip of the roots. "She will destroy us all. The moon will curse you for this." "The moon has already passed its judgment," Halric said, his voice flat. He looked up at the roots holding her, the roots that pulsed with my power, my life. He looked at her, and then his gaze seemed to travel through the stone of the keep, finding me in the tower above. I felt his presence through the bond, a wave of grim triumph, of fierce love, of absolute finality. He did not need to give an order. He knew I could feel what was needed. He turned his back on her. "Kael," he commanded, "take the traitors to the cells. They will await my judgment." As Kael and the guard moved to round up the stunned and defeated rebels, Ilara's screams turned to horrified shrieks. The roots, my roots, tightened their grip. It was not a violent, crushing death. It was something far more ancient, far more terrifying. The life was simply drawn from her. The green light in the roots brightened as they absorbed her energy, her life force. Her skin grew pale, then gray. Her hair lost its color. Her body withered, aging decades in a matter of seconds. Her final scream was a dry, rattling gasp. And then she was silent, a withered husk of what she had once been. The roots gently lowered her lifeless body to the floor, and then, as one, retreated back into the stone, leaving only the cracked flags and the profound, terrifying silence as proof of what they had done. Halric stood for a long moment, his back to the hall. Then he turned. His eyes, clear and gray once more, swept over the assembled wolves. His gaze was hard, uncompromising, the look of an alpha who had bled for his pack and reclaimed it. "This pack is reborn," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "We will no longer live in fear of the shadows. We will learn to walk in the balance of moon and sun. We have a new Luna, a sun-blooded Luna, and from this day forward, her word is my word. Her life is my life. An attack on her is an attack on me. Let any who would challenge that. Remember Ilara." He looked up then, his gaze once again finding me through stone and distance, and in his eyes I saw it all. The victory, the cost, and the promise of a new dawn that we would face, finally, together. 1 year later, the scent of the world had changed. The air that blew down from the northern mountains no longer carried the sharp, sterile bite of a lingering winter, but the rich, damp perfume of thawing earth and new life. In the valley below Vainder's heart, the fields, once barren and cracked, were now lush with the green shoots of a healthy spring planting. The sickness in the land was in retreat, not banished, but held at bay by a fragile, hard-won balance. I stood on the balcony of our tower, the morning sun warm on my face. A gentle breeze tugged at the simple linen dress I wore, no longer the white of sacrifice, but the deep green of new leaves. A year ago, this balcony had been the precipice from which my alpha had leaped into battle. Now it was a garden. Thick, vibrant vines, coaxed from the ancient stone, climbed the walls, their leaves a tapestry of every shade of green. Clay pots filled with soil I had healed with my own hands, overflowed with herbs and wildflowers, their fragrance a constant, gentle blessing. It was my sanctuary, a place of life carved from the fortress's heart of war. A pair of strong arms wrapped around my waist from behind, and a familiar weight settled against my back. Halric. He didn't speak, just rested his chin on my shoulder, his presence a warm, solid anchor. His scent, that intoxicating mix of fine winter and something that was just him, enveloped me. The bond between us was no longer a tumultuous, crackling thing, but a deep, steady river that flowed silently between our souls. I could feel his contentment, his peace, a stark contrast to the grim, burdened alpha I had first met. "The scouts returned from the southern ridge this morning, Barkat," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "The Blood Moon hunters have withdrawn. They have not been seen in our territory for 2 full moons." "They fear the stories," I whispered, leaning back against his chest. "They fear the truth," he corrected gently. "They fear a pack that is no longer dying. They fear a land that heals itself." The stories had spread like wildfire through the confederation of packs. Tales of the Barren Omega, who was not barren at all, the sun-blooded Luna, who had made the alphas keep bloom, and whose touch could draw poison from a mortal wound. Some still called me witch, but now the word was spoken with fear and respect, not scorn. The delegations that came to Vaindar's heart no longer came to challenge Halric's rule, but to beg for his Luna's blessing on their own failing lands. I was no longer just a person, I was a symbol, the living embodiment of the balance Halric had fought for. The pack, too, had changed. The fear had not vanished overnight, but it had slowly been replaced by a fierce, protective loyalty. They had seen their friends and family saved by my gift. They had eaten the first true harvest in a decade. They saw the new pups, born healthier and stronger than any had been in a generation. They saw their alpha, no longer a solitary, scarred ruler, but a wolf who was complete, who ruled not just with iron, but with a hope they could all feel. Kyle was now the staunchest of my defenders, his pragmatic mind having accepted the undeniable proof of my worth. The traitors who had followed Alara had been given a choice: exile or a blood oath of renewed fealty. Most chose the oath, and now served with a zealous devotion born of shame and a second chance. The keep was no longer a place of just shadow and stone. It was a home. Halrick's hand came to rest on my stomach, his touch gentle, possessive. Morwen seems to think there is a new miracle growing here. My own hand covered his, a soft smile touching my lips. It was the greatest impossibility of all, a secret we had guarded even more closely than my first, a defiance of every law of our kind. A life was quickening inside me, a child, his child. The healer had been stunned, claiming it was impossible. A sun-blooded was barren. It was the price of her gift. But we were not just sun-blooded. We were a union, a balance of sun and moon, of earth and spirit. Our bond had not just healed the land. It had rewritten our own laws of nature. This child would not be like any other. It would be the first of a new kind, born of both powers, a living bridge between the two worlds our people had forgotten were one. "She is not growing in my blood," I whispered, the truth of it a profound, humbling awe. "She is growing in the bond between us." He turned me in his arms, his stormy eyes soft, filled with a love that still, after all this time, stole my breath. He was no longer just the alpha, the myth. He was my Horik, my mate, the other half of my soul. The scars on his face were no longer marks of brutality, but a map of the battles he had fought to find his way to me. "They called you useless," he murmured, his forehead resting against mine. "They said your blood was ash." "They were wrong," I finished for him, my voice clear and steady. The silent, broken girl sold for scraps was a ghost, a memory. In her place was a woman who had found her voice, her power, and her purpose. He kissed me, a slow, deep kiss filled with the promises of a future we were building together. A future that was growing not from victory or conquest, but from the quiet, miraculous strength of a garden coaxed from ash. From the courtyard below, the sound of children's laughter drifted up on the morning breeze. Pups, born into a time of hope, chasing each other through the sun-dappled grounds of a keep that had learned to embrace the light. We stood together on the balcony, the Alpha and his Luna, the moon and the sun, watching over our pack, our home. The world was still filled with shadows and dangers, but here, in the heart of the storm, we had found our balance. We had found our peace. And in the sacred, silent space between our joined hands and our beating hearts, a new world was beginning to bloom.